Hi, I'm Lynn in March of 2025, here to give you an informal demo of a feature we just completed on the Carbon Farm Network application. So this video will be focused on planning, specifically planning from recipes. In terms of technology, this is being implemented using Holochain and an existing software layer called HREA for Holochain Resources Events Agents, which implements the value flows REA-based standard economic vocabulary. So a quick review of some data that's already configured that we'll be using in the planning. First of all, we'll look at resource specifications. These include all the material items and services that are part of the supply chain, and also currencies. If a network wanted, this could also include types of work, equipment that's used, digital resources, or so-called externalities that they might want to keep track of, like carbon emitted or sequestered. You can see here we have yarn, we have fiber in various states of cleanliness, etc., and some services. Here are process specifications, which will be used in the recipes and will kind of structure the user planning experience, as we'll see shortly. So all of this is user defined. You can imagine a very different kind of network here just by defining your own configurations. For this feature, new are recipes for both production processes and exchanges. Recipes are used when the processes are repeatable, basically. Otherwise, you could just create your plan directly. But anytime you have to create basically the same plan over and over, recipes are very helpful. These are this page is production-related recipes. You can see that they're structured with a process with inputs and outputs. Let's just take a look at something here. How about spinning brown yarn? Starting at kind of the end, what we're producing here is brown 50-50 yarn. 50 just means half wool, sheep's wool and half alpaca fiber. And in this case, it's brown. The action is produce. These provider roles, we'll see what that does for you. It gives the application a way to try to find the right agent to plug into the plan. Recipe quantities, usually your output quantity is your standard batch size or a minimum batch size. In this case, we're just using one pound. Everything happens in pounds here. Inputs for that, to produce that, are both consumption inputs. So the action is consume. Again, it's just, so Carbon Farm Network owns the fiber all the way through their supply chain. So we see these roles here tend to be the network. And here we have brown alpaca clean, which is the scoured fiber, as input. The quantity looks a little odd maybe for 1 pound of output, but it's half sheep and half alpaca, so that would be a 0.5, and some is added because there's about a 10% loss in spinning, so we'll get 0.55 pounds there. And this stage gives you a way to be more specific about what kind of output you require for this input. So this input is saying, for this recipe, I require brown alpaca clean, and it has to have been shipped. That's the stage. So this is, the other one is basically the same, except it's white wool, 0.55 again. And then there's an output that's not actually material produced, but is a service that is created by this process so that it can be used to exchange for money. And this is so the action here is deliver service. The provider is the spinning mill, receiver is the network. And it has, everywhere in recipes is the ability to give kind of a standard set of instructions that will tell it how to create the quantity when it's making the plan. This little set we have for Carbon Farm Network are sort of specific to them. We think we'll kind of gather useful generic instructions that will help everybody in planning as we go along here. Okay, so that's that. You can see if we looked at, say, a shipping process, we have pickup of 3 kinds of yarn and drop off of the same 3 kinds of yarn, and the system knows because it's a pickup and drop off, it knows that these are the same resources going in and going out of the process, which is called ship to knit. Also, there's a service here, a shipping service. So this is, you can see this is a bunch of kind of individually defined recipes. We looked a little bit at how they would end up connecting, and we'll look at that more when we look at the plan where it's a little bit more visible. Here are exchange recipes as opposed to production. They are not input, process, output, but they have this one thing in the middle is now an agreement, and this is purchasing gray alpaca from the farm. It has 2 clauses. One is gray alpaca, which goes from the farmer role, is transferred from the farmer to the network, and we're just using one as our kind of baseline quantity. And for 1 pound of gray alpaca, the farmer will expect some amount of US dollars from the network back to the farmer. This quantity here is a default. If there isn't an actual offer found, then it can use this as a default. Okay, so that's how those work. One more thing to show you before we get into the actual planning are the offers and requests. So at the beginning of the season, the suppliers involved in this network indicate what they have to offer for this season. They can estimate their available quantity. These are the resource specifications. They give their price, and these are, it's a bunch of farmers, and it's the mills basically that do the processing. And we have requests. So this is the designers, and these are their specific requests for yarns for their products that they plan on creating for the season. Both of these are test data, and both of these are now entered by the administrator, but in the future could be entered by the suppliers and the designers themselves, and are planned to be. So now we are ready to start planning. We will add a plan. You can see that we get the offers and the requests up. They kind of sandwich the plan in the middle. In this case, we are going to hit this Create from Requests button, which will take all the requests, apply the recipes, and create everything in a demand-driven way, like this. So you can see At the end of the plan, there's a column called Satisfy Requests. This is what's also known as independent demand. This is what the Carbon Farm Network schedules and promises to get for the designers. Right now it's exactly the same as the requests, but they can edit and change things here. The demand-driven algorithm has basically just worked its way backwards, stage by stage, looking at the inputs and outputs. So, for example, let's see, before we were looking at ship to spin and spinning. For example, here, this spinning white wool, this spinning brown yarn, sorry, process right here requires white wool clean from the ship stage, and it requires brown alpaca clean from the ship stage. So since it needs 192 pounds of white wool clean, actually that goes into all three of these recipes. So together, the algorithm knows that we need, it says 501 pounds of white wool clean to be dropped off for these three spinning processes. And if you add up these 192, 161, and 148, I think you'll get that. So that's how it basically works. The inputs kind of pull the outputs. They look for recipes that are the right thing for them. You can also see at the top, these columns are structured with those process specifications that we looked at earlier. In general, you can see that the data here is all pretty much configurable. Everything you see here is structured through those configurations we looked at. So this can really support any kind of a supply chain network that tends to have regularly structured stages of their production processes. Here you see that the Carbon Farm Network has one big plan for the entire season, but it doesn't have to be that way. You can have as many as you want. For example, we were recently talking with a food processing network who would have perhaps 3 plans every day, one for each of their production processes. Let's see, over here, just to point out, there's a total cost that we keep tabs of, which helps think about the planning. Okay. The only thing you can do before we've actually saved this plan is work on the Satisfy Requests column, otherwise known as independent demand. So this is what the network is promising to the designers. Right now it matches the requests, but it doesn't have to. We can, if something, let's say we took a look down at the beginning of this plan and saw that there was going to be extra fiber and said, oh, well, maybe we can use that for some yarn samples. Let's make some extra yarn. So we're going to add something here for that. Before we add, let's just look. Right here we have brown 50/50 yarn, and this shipping process is dropping off 348 pounds. So let's say that we add a request. In this case, it's from the Carbon Farm Network, and it's to the Carbon Farm Network because the Carbon Farm Network has chosen to own all of the fiber through their whole supply chain once they've picked it up from the farm. We are going to make some brown 50/50 yarn. We're going to make the transfers, the action for satisfying that request. We're going to make 20 pounds. That got added to the bottom, I think. And then you can see that now this is 368 pounds, and it's recalculated through the whole supply chain all the way to the beginning, based still on the recipes. So now we can save the plan. That's over here. We'll call it 2025 season and hit save. Takes a minute to save it the first time. One thing to note while it's saving is that, as a side note, if you are the person creating the recipes, a really good way to test them is to just come over to planning and hit add a plan, and without saving it, just see what you get. You'll be able to debug your recipes quite handily. Okay, when the plan has been saved and comes back, we can notice a few things. One is that there are some new icons on each of these commitments. We can edit, we can delete, we can move them up and down for easier viewing, grouping things. There's some backwards looking directional commitments here. Also, those reflect the exchange recipes. So, for example, here's when brown alpaca dirty is picked up from the farm. Carbon Farm Network expects to pay for that fiber while they're there. So from Big Creek Farm to Carbon Farm Network, and then transfer some dollars from Carbon Farm Network to Big Creek Farm. The algorithm tries to figure out the proper agents from those roles. Here it doesn't always get enough because there are several farms offering brown alpaca dirty. And we can fix a couple of those things just to show you how that would work. But like over here, where there's only one shipping service to find, Take It There Shipping, it found that and applied their rate to how they quantify their service, which is by pound. And so that one's accurate. This one, we can do a little work on it. Anyway, that's what these backwards directional commitments are about. You can also see that they stick together, like they're attached because they're part of one agreement. For example, if I move this white alpaca dirty up, it's going to bring that transfer with it. Another thing you'll notice is that we have some red notifications here on the left, and during your planning, if things change, right now the plan is calculated so that it works consistently, demand driven, but I'll show you some changes that'll trigger other notifications. You can get these anywhere in the plan where it thinks it doesn't have enough for the next stage, basically. Like here for this white alpaca dirty, knows that it needs 202 pounds, and it picked Big Creek Farm, and Big Creek Farm has only 150 pounds. It says 202 requested. So we see those messages. There's another one over here we can take a look at. You'll see that these white wool clean commitments say 165 pounds in inventory, and that is in fact the case. That's left over from last year, and the algorithm is capable of taking inventory into account when it's calculating backwards. Before it looks for a recipe to make something, it looks for things that are in stock already and therefore don't need to be made, or maybe need to be only made but less quantity, and takes that into account. So this inventory here affects the rest of the calculations backwards when it's creating the plan. Okay, so let's let's play around with this a little bit, so just so I can show you. So let's see, white alpaca dirty. We know that Big Creek can only supply, I don't know, 150, I think. So let's just change it to 150. These are still going to be approximate, of course. They'll see what happens in the pickup. Okay, so that's done. Now that got rid of that notification, let's create a new commitment so we can get some more white alpaca dirty. All Alpaca is offering up 55 pounds. So let's say from All Alpaca to Carbon Farm Network, we're looking for white alpaca dirty. We're going to pick it up, and let's say we'll just say we'll use the 55. Okay, so that one was added probably down here. Yep, that was added to the bottom. Again, you can move it up and put things where you want them. Okay. So in reality, the Carbon Farm Network spends several weeks before any animals are sheared, just in discussion with farmers and mills and tweaking their plan to get everything lined up properly. Even sometimes the designers might have to rethink if things aren't lining up on the supply side. So we've tried to provide as many features as possible to help them replan during this time period. And I just showed you, the simple ones where you can make individual changes wherever you want. And now I'm going to show you a little bit of a supply forward and demand backwards replanning feature that we added. This is, let's see, let's just suppose that the scouring mill called, and this is probably not a very realistic example, but let's say they called and said, we're not getting as much weight out of our white wool this year, and if you've planned for the kind of standard 40% reduction from scouring, you might want to think about 50%. They say, okay, well, we'll do some replanning here. Let's make that change. So here we have 854 pounds of white wool coming in. And instead of 512, let's say that's going to produce, I don't know, 420. Didn't do the calculation. Now, we got a notification because now there's not enough white wool to feed what the shipping process is expecting. It's only expecting it because of spinning, of course. Let's see what happens if we replan forward. That's these little arrows, forwards and backwards. So right now our error says we're 92 pounds short. And if we had made several changes, they would all show up here. You can see it's letting you know what it's going to do so you can change your mind. It's going to decrease that white wool. And it did right here. And now the notification is gone. Let's just take that one more forward. It's also able to recalculate the shipping service because there's less poundage being shipped, and it's going to continue the white wool. Okay, made those changes. Now, instead of just taking that all the way forward, let's say we found a source for clean white wool that can be shipped directly to the spinning mill. And we want to add that into this plan. These little plus signs underneath the gray columns that contain the kind of full plan are for exactly that purpose, to add resources coming into the plan in the middle of the plan. So let's say that here at Spinning, we're going to be able to purchase from Hudson Yarn to Carbon Farm Network some more white wool clean. And let's say they can sell us 300 pounds. And they would like us to take all of that, even if it's too much. Add that in. It's doing its reciprocal transfer calculation here. So now you can see the transfer came in. So just generally, you can always calculate one column backwards or forwards in case you've made several changes to that column. You can also change individual commitments. And you can imagine over the course of planning, a lot of changes will happen. Also wanted to mention in general that we've talked a lot about kind of supply driven and demand driven and forwards and backwards. Different sectors are naturally sort of more demand driven or more supply driven. And often even that meets in the middle somewhere. Probably a more realistic example for the Carbon Farm Network that I could give you than the one we just did, but it's a little more effort here, is that they might want to take advantage of all the fiber they can get from all of the farms in a season, even if they don't have an immediate need for it. So they would, after the demand-driven algorithm is run, they might plan forward using those availability estimates from the farms, and they would just want to keep the clean fiber in inventory rather than dirty fiber, so they would probably scour everything and then just store the extra inventory. So in that case, you might see that for them, if they did that, right here between scouring and shipping, or maybe after shipping, depending, would be where supply meets demand. Forward from the farms to here, and backwards from the designer's needs to here. So I think that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed learning about our new planning features.